His name was Frank Morrison, and at 72 years old he didn't look like much to anyone anymore. The white beard was scraggly, the hair thin and unkempt. That red jacket he wore over a faded grey t-shirt had seen better days, probably a decade ago. His eyes carried a sadness that seemed permanent, etched deep into the lines of his face. He'd been coming to this range for 6 months now, ever since his wife, Martha, passed. The shooting helped, somehow. Gave him something to focus on besides the empty house and the memories that lived in every corner of it. Nobody at the range knew him, and that's how he preferred it. He'd check in quietly, take his lane, fire his rounds, and leave. No conversation, no connection, just the rifle, the target, and the temporary peace that came with the discipline of marksmanship. But today was different. Today the range was crowded with younger shooters, mostly men in their 20s and 30s, showing off expensive gear and talking loudly about their groupings and their modifications. Frank had requested lane 12, the one at the far end, the one with targets set at 300 yards. The range officer, a kid named Derek who couldn't have been more than 25, had looked at him like he'd asked to fly to the moon. "Sir, that's for experienced long-range shooters. We've got closer lanes that would be more appropriate for someone your age." Frank had simply repeated his request, his voice barely above a whisper. Derek had sighed dramatically, rolled his eyes at another young shooter nearby who snickered, and finally assigned him the lane. As Frank walked down the firing line carrying his rifle case, he could feel the eyes on him, heard the whispers. Is that old guy really going to shoot long range? Somebody's going to have to help him back to his car after he throws his shoulder out. This should be entertaining. He set his case down, opened it slowly with those shaking hands, and pulled out a rifle that made a few of the nearby shooters pause. It wasn't new, wasn't tactical black with all the modern accessories. It was an old M40, a Marine Corps sniper rifle, the wood stock worn smooth from decades of use. Frank began his setup with methodical precision, each movement deliberate, practiced, almost ritualistic. Derek wandered over, clipboard in hand, that smirk still plastered on his face. "Look, Pops, I'm going to need you to show me you can actually handle that thing before I let you hot. Range rules, safety first." Frank looked up at him, those sad eyes meeting Derek's for just a moment, and nodded slowly. He didn't argue, didn't protest, just waited. Derek crossed his arms. "Okay, so talk me through your sight picture, your breathing, your trigger control." Frank's voice came out quiet, almost too quiet to hear over the sounds of other shooters. Sight alignment, sight picture, natural respiratory pause, straight back trigger press, follow through. Derek laughed. "Yeah, okay, you watch some YouTube videos. That's great. Just don't hurt yourself out there, all right?" The range went hot. Shooters up and down the line began engaging their targets. The crack of rifles filled the air, the smell of gunpowder sharp and acrid. Frank loaded a single round into his rifle. Just one. He settled into position, that old body somehow finding a stability that seemed impossible given his age and the tremor in his hands. He pressed his cheek to the stock, his eye finding the scope, and for the first time in months his hands stopped shaking. Everything stopped. The world narrowed to just him, the rifle, and that small target 300 yards downrange. He took a breath, let half of it out. The rifle cracked once. 300 yards away, the steel target rang with a sound like a bell, clear and pure and unmistakable. A perfect center hit. The shooters on either side of Frank stopped, looked downrange, looked at him. Frank calmly worked the bolt, ejected the spent casing and loaded another round. The second shot rang the steel again. Same spot, same perfect tone. Now more shooters were stopping, lowering their rifles, watching this old man in the worn red jacket. Derek had frozen halfway down the firing line, his mouth slightly open. Frank fired a third round. Another ring. The entire range had gone quiet now except for that rhythmic bell-like sound of steel being struck at distance. Over and over, each shot identical to the last. Frank fired 10 rounds total, 10 rings, 10 perfect hits. When he finally set the rifle down and stepped back from the line, making it safe, the silence was profound. Derek approached slowly, his clipboard hanging forgotten at his side, his face pale. "Sir, that was... Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Frank began packing his rifle away, his movements slow and careful. "A long time ago. Different life." His voice carried that same sadness, that same quiet resignation. Derek swallowed hard. "Were you military?" Frank didn't answer, just continued his methodical packing. Another shooter, an older man in his 50s who'd been watching from 2 lanes over, walked up. He'd noticed something Derek hadn't: the rifle case, the faded eagle, globe and anchor stencil barely visible on the worn canvas. "Marine Corps," the man said quietly. "That's an M40. That's a sniper rifle." Derek's face went from pale to white. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to." Frank closed his rifle case, latched it, and finally looked at Derek directly. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You saw an old man and made assumptions. That's what people do." He picked up his case, started to walk away. Derek stood there, rooted to the spot, shame washing over him in waves. The other shooters had gathered now, a small crowd, all of them staring at the old man in the red jacket, who'd just put on a shooting clinic that none of them could match. One of them, a younger guy with expensive gear and a tactical vest, called out, "Sir, wait, were you really a sniper? Like in combat?" Frank stopped, stood there for a long moment, his back to them all. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet they had to strain to hear it. "Vietnam, 2 tours, Scout Sniper, 1st Marine Division." The words landed like physical things, heavy and undeniable. The tactical vest guy took a step back. Derek looked like he might be sick. Another voice came from the back of the small crowd. "Frank Morrison." Everyone turned. An older man was pushing through, maybe 60, wearing a Marine Corps veteran ball cap. His eyes were wide, locked on Frank. "Frank Morrison. Oh my God, sir, is that really you?" Frank turned slowly, his sad eyes finding the man in the ball cap. Recognition flickered across his weathered face. "Jenkins?" The man in the ball cap was moving faster now, his hand extended. "Staff Sergeant Jenkins, sir. Well, I was a corporal when you trained me. Quantico, 1978. You were one of our sniper instructors." They shook hands, and Jenkins's grip was tight, almost desperate. "Sir, you saved my life. That ambush drill you ran us through, the one where you made us practice target transition under stress for 6 hours straight. We all thought you were crazy. But 2 years later in Beirut, that drill saved my entire team. I never forgot it. Never forgot you." The crowd had grown larger now. Other shooters from across the range had noticed the commotion and wandered over. Jenkins turned to them, his voice loud and proud. "This man is a legend. Certified kills in triple digits, trained hundreds of Marine snipers over 2 decades, received the Silver Star for actions in Hugh City. This man bled for his country and then spent another 20 years making sure the next generation of Marines could survive their wars." Frank's face hadn't changed, still carried that same profound sadness, but something in his eyes had shifted, a crack in the armour. "That was a long time ago, Jenkins. Different person." Jenkins shook his head firmly. "No, sir. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And once a teacher, always a teacher. What you taught me, what you taught all of us, it mattered. It still matters." He turned to Derek, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "This young man give you trouble, sir?" Frank glanced at Derek, then back to Jenkins. He was doing his job, keeping the range safe. But Jenkins wasn't having it. He looked at Derek directly. "You disrespected this man. You disrespected a Marine Corps legend. You judged him by his age and his appearance, and you treated him like he was incompetent." Derek's voice cracked when he spoke. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known—" Frank cut him off, his quiet voice somehow carrying authority despite its softness. "If you'd known, you would have treated me differently. That's the problem. Respect isn't something you give only after someone proves they deserve it. Respect is what you offer first, to everyone, until they show you otherwise. I'm an old man in a worn-out jacket. I look like I should be at home watching television, not shooting long range. But you didn't know my story. You didn't know anyone's story. You just saw the surface and made your judgment." The silence that followed was absolute. Derek stood there, tears actually forming in his eyes, his young face twisted with shame and regret. "You're right. You're absolutely right, sir. I don't know how to make this right." Frank set down his rifle case, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile, small and sad, crossed his face. You make it right by learning, by remembering. Every person who walks through that door has a story, Every person deserves your respect until they prove otherwise. Age doesn't make someone incompetent. Appearance doesn't tell you what someone's capable of. You're young. You have time to learn this. Don't waste it." Jenkins stepped forward, placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. "Sir, there's a group of us, former students of yours. We meet once a month, share stories, stay connected. We'd be honoured if you'd join us. Martha's passing, we heard about it. We wanted to reach out, but nobody knew how to find you." Frank's composure finally cracked, just slightly. His eyes glistened. "She was my whole world. When she went, I didn't see much point in staying connected to anything." Jenkins squeezed his shoulder. "Sir, you taught us that Marines never leave another Marine behind. You're not alone. You never were. We're your family too." The crowd around them had grown silent, many of them visibly moved by what they were witnessing. Derek wiped his eyes, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, your range fees are covered, for life. And I'd like to learn from you, if you'd be willing to teach me. Not just about shooting, about respect, about seeing people for who they are." Frank looked at this young man who dismissed him so casually an hour ago, and nodded slowly. "All right, but you start by learning names. Everyone who comes through that door, you learn their name. You look them in the eye. You treat them like they matter, because they do." Over the following weeks, things changed at the range. Derek implemented new protocols, started greeting everyone personally, asking about their experience level without judgment, offering help instead of assumptions. Frank started coming more regularly, and word spread about who he was. Young shooters would ask for tips, for stories, for guidance. He gave it freely, that same quiet patience he'd shown decades ago to young Marines heading into combat. Jenkins' monthly group became bi-weekly, and Frank attended every meeting. The sadness in his eyes never fully left, but it was joined by something else now: purpose, connection, the understanding that his story wasn't over yet. One afternoon, 3 months after that first confrontation, Frank was at his usual lane when a teenager approached nervously. The kid was maybe 17, skinny, uncertain. "Sir, my grandfather was a Marine. He passed last year. He used to talk about his sniper instructor, a guy who was harder than woodpecker lips but fair, a guy who made them believe they could do impossible things. Was that you?" Frank looked at this kid, saw the hope and grief mixed together in his young face, and felt something shift in his chest. "What was your grandfather's name?" the kid told him. Frank remembered the young Marine, remembered training him, remembered getting a letter years later about how that Marine had saved 3 wounded soldiers under fire in Desert Storm. Frank spent the next 2 hours with that kid, teaching him the basics, sharing stories about his grandfather, giving him a connection to a man he'd lost too soon. As the sun set and the range began to empty, Derek approached them both, watched Frank's patient instruction, the way he treated this grieving teenager with such gentle respect. When the kid finally left, promising to return next week, Derek said quietly, "You're changing lives here, sir, every day, just like you did in the Corps." Frank packed up his rifle, that old M40 that had seen so much history, and looked around the range. "We all have value, Derek, every single person. The trick is seeing it even when it's hidden, especially when it's hidden." The story of the old man who rang steel at 300 yards spread beyond the range, became something of a local legend. But those who knew Frank, who really knew him, understood that the shooting was never the point. The point was the lesson. The point was respect. The point was understanding that worth isn't determined by appearance, by age, by the clothes someone wears or the tremor in their hands. Worth is inherent. Worth is earned through how we treat others, how we see beyond the surface, how we honour the stories that every person carries. Frank Morrison had spent his youth defending his country, his middle years training others to do the same, and now his final years teaching a different kind of lesson. One that might matter even more